All right, we are live with Dr. Helen Bond. Uh, we are so excited to have you. We are, Dr. Bond is. Let me see. I've got. There we go. We're so excited to have you. Dr. Bond is going to be presenting at this fascinating event called New Insights on the New Testament. It's September 26th through the 28th. It's a 3-day online conference that has 13 of the world's leading biblical scholars. And Dr. Bond is one of them. And actually, if you get this before the 13th, there's like an early bird rate or something that that you can get for the conference. We are Dr. Bond um, is a professor at the University of Edinburgh. She's a professor of Christian origins. Her research really focuses on the historical Jesus, the Gospels, the first little bit of Christianity. And I am just so excited to be able to have you on the Unbelief podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
We're in the New Insights in the New Testament event. You are going to be talking about the last hours of Jesus, what really happened. I love this topic. I think for me, I love really solid scholarship that dives into cultural background and understands the Bible, not just as some literal text, but that's doing something with the words and not sort of bound to, this is exactly what happened.
Mm.
Just to sort of get us into the conversation, like give us an overview of what you're talking about when you say what really happened.
Well, that's a bit of a tease, obviously. Um, I mean, like you, I don't think what the Gospels are really trying to do is give us some sort of historically accurate account. And if that's the case, they weren't very good because we've got four distinct accounts. So what they were trying to do, though, I think, is to give us a sort of a theologically rich account of the real meaning of Jesus's death,
Right.
not just sort of in terms of atonement and stuff, but in terms of sort of what does it mean? What does it mean in terms of who killed him? Were the Romans to blame? What was the Jewish involvement? They're using Jesus's death to say so much about their own situation. And
Right.
that's what really fascinates me because I'm really, I suppose, a historian of Roman Judea. That's what I
Oh,
really
wow.
find
Yeah.
interesting. And so I'm really fascinated by this sort of power play between the prefect and the high priest, and the
Right.
prefect appoints the high priest. So the high priest is a Roman appointee, so he's got to sort of steer that line between keeping the prefect happy, in this case Pontius Pilate, and also looking after the interests of the temple and his own people. And I think they've both got incredibly difficult jobs.
Right.
There's riots, and you know anything like that could break out at any moment. So,
Right.
so what I'm going to be doing in the talk for the conference is really to start by saying what is it that the Gospels are trying to do, and sort of unpack the sort of the rhetoric of the Gospels
Right.
a little bit, because in Mark's Gospel you have two sort of twin trials. You have a
Yeah.
trial in front of the Jews, a trial in front of Rome, and there's no obvious reason why Jesus should have two trials. But so what's going on there? And then you have bits and pieces that are just in one gospel. So
Right.
Matthew is the only gospel where Pilate is washing his hands and saying,
Right.
I am innocent of this man's blood. And then in Luke's gospel, that's the only one that has the trial in front of Herod. So
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of what I'm going to be doing is at least starting off by saying, what is it that the Gospels want you to understand by this? And then once we've tried to kind of work that out, we'll go back behind those, and
Right.
with the benefit of Josephus, because we are
Right.
so lucky. And I think people don't often realize, there is no Roman province apart
Right.
from Italy, for which we have so much information.
Yeah.
Josephus is just a gold mine. And obviously, you have to be careful when you're using his writing.
Right.
He's got his own agenda, his own
Yeah.
spin on things. But we have so much information about first century Judea from Josephus, also from archaeology. We have a
Hmm.
really good picture of what life was like 2,000 years ago. And Josephus is particularly good on the social, political kind of, particularly the hierarchies, the elite, and of course that's the group that got rid of Jesus. So in this case, normally we want to know about the ordinary people, but in this case, I think it's fine that Josephus is telling us about the elite. So we can compare.
Yeah.
I mean, there's other characters a little bit like Jesus, and we can compare what happens to Jesus with what happens to them.
Yeah. You know, now you bring up Josephus. I'm fascinated by him, and I also am fascinated. There's, I think, if I'm remembering it right, there's this one passage where, you know, because he's not perfect, right? But there's the one passage where he's talking about a battle that happens. Like, where's the, I almost want to. I'm sorry, I can't remember the name where they like build like a pathway up to this plateau, and it appears that he actually didn't go all the way up.
Well, I mean, he's getting his information from a variety of places.
Right, right.
Some of it, doubtlessly eyewitness, but
Oh, for sure.
it's like all eyewitness testimony. It's been shaped in the telling, and
Yeah,
people's own interests kind of shape what they tell, what they forget, the
right.
way they spin it. So, yeah, you have to be careful with him, but then you have to be careful with anybody,
For
and
sure.
yeah, I mean he's an amazing resource for all of this information about the first century and the aristocracy, that
Yeah,
aristocratic priesthood that's so important in
so
the
important.
yeah, he's part of it. I mean, he is an aristocratic priest himself,
Right.
so he knows them thoroughly.
Yeah, and I love you use that word spin, right? That
Mm.
is definitely something that we are aware of in our modern discourse as
Yeah.
well. And I'd love to hear, when we're talking about the gospel accounts of the passion, um, what is the spin? Or maybe a better way to say, what are some of the literary or theological motives that you feel like are shaping the passion narratives?
I think definitely trying to move some of the blame for Jesus's crucifixion away from the Romans and onto the Jewish aristocracy. I mean,
Interesting.
that's definite, because I mean, crucifixion is a Roman penalty.
Right.
If Jesus ended up on a cross, it was Pilate who sent him there, and Pilate wouldn't have needed much in the way of an excuse to send him there. I mean, life
Right.
was cheap. The life of a provincial like Jesus. I mean, he could have just sent him like that. But the Gospels make out that there's this sort of high level drama between the Jewish leaders, the aristocracy, and
Hmm.
and Pilate, and they are the prime movers. Even in some accounts, that they're pushing Pilate into it. That he doesn't
Right.
want to do it, and they keep kind of John's account. We have no king but Caesar, and then
Right.
Pilate does it. So yeah, I think you've got an interesting kind of dynamic going on there in the Gospels. But I think overall, what they're wanting to do is to suggest that that although Jesus died on a Roman cross, you can't really blame the Romans, and more importantly, perhaps, Jesus isn't really a troublemaker according to Rome.
Mm.
Because I mean, that's the big worry, that
Yeah.
people are going around talking about Jesus. New converts think, yeah, I like what you're saying about Jesus. I like this message. And then somebody says, well, yeah, and of course he did die on a Roman cross. And
Right.
it's like, oh, wait a minute.
Wait, what
I'm not going to
happened?
follow somebody who died for treason, a
Right.
convicted felon.
Yeah.
So I think they have to say, yes, he was crucified, but
Right.
he didn't deserve it, and the Roman prefect didn't really want to do it. It was all the machinations of the Jewish chief priests, and I think that's kind of the main spin that they're trying to give it.
Right. So So I think what I'm hearing you saying is it's in the early Christian church, it's sort of serving this purpose of making him a martyr, and not just a criminal. Is that am I hearing that right?
Yeah, certainly there are martyrdom elements. I mean,
Uh-huh.
particularly in Luke's gospel, he stresses Jesus's innocence, and Jesus almost has a noble death in Luke. He sort of, he expects to die. I mean, in all the gospels, he expects to die. He sort of goes to the cross willingly, obedient to the Father's will. So there's that
Right.
element of sort of laying down his life, martyrdom in all of them. But I think it's particularly strong in Luke, where he's sort of
Right.
presented as a prophetic martyr figure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious now, and obviously you have access to an understanding of all kinds of sources, data sources that are outside of the biblical narrative. So, what data is it um, that that undermines this idea that Jesus underwent a Jewish trial?
Um, yeah, well, I mean, you can start with the Gospels themselves. They
Okay.
are all very different. You know,
Hmm.
in Matthew and Mark, he has a proper trial. In Luke and John, it's more of a preliminary hearing. So,
Uh-huh.
that's quite different. There's a formal verdict in Matthew and Luke, and not in the other two. But then when you look at the way that justice works in
Right.
Judea in the first century, there's actually, people talk about a Sanhedrin, this
Right.
council of judges. There's actually no evidence for a Sanhedrin, at least no
Really?
fixed council. No, this is a complete sort of
Wow.
myth. There, when the Gospels talk about the Sanhedrin, I think what they're meaning is, I mean, the word Sanhedrin just means a sitting down, a council, a group of
Hmm.
people kind of getting together. So when they say the Sanhedrin, I think they just mean that group, that council. And as
Right.
far as we know, when people were judged in the first century, I mean, for a major crime, because a small
Right.
crime, nobody cares really, but for
Right.
for a major crime, the high priest is the main judge, and he
Okay.
would just sort of get together anybody else who he thought would be useful. So he might gather
Hmm.
together a few of his family members, other chief priests, maybe a couple of Pharisees, other people who maybe knew something about it, but they'd all be aristocrats, they'd all be friends. It would be his little group,
Right.
and he'd just sort of summon a few people to listen to a trial with him, and that was called a Sanhedrin, a council,
Ah,
a
okay.
group of people. And that seems to be the way that it worked. It was just an ad hoc group
Okay.
summoned by the chief priests. It wasn't a kind of a fixed thing. People talk about, I mean, in centuries later in the Mishnah, they talk about a council of 71 made up of
Hmm.
Pharisees, Sadducees, but that doesn't seem to have been the case in the first century. So again, you keep sort of finding things that don't quite work in the first century.
Right.
Um, and
So
also,
go
I mean,
ahead.
also, just like in a film today, we love the big courtroom drama.
Right.
It's
Right.
escalates to the end, and then you get the courtroom drama, and you know the person is found to be guilty or not guilty. And ancient biographies have a bit of that too.
Uh-huh.
There are other biographies like the Gospels that sort of end with this sort of the heroes standing in front of the judge, the emperor, whoever it might be, and kind of giving their defense. So this is a literary thing that's known in the ancient world just as much as it is today, and it's just high drama.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess this is really fascinating. So the idea of the Sanhedrin, it never what like an official group. That never was the case. There was never one of those.
No, there was never an official sort of formal trial, like formal group like that. No, when the rabbis talk about it much later, there they seem to be kind of it's their sort of their, I don't know, fantasy group. It's what they think the land ought to be judged by. They think the best thing would be this group of 71 people. But when you think about it, 71 people, that's a
Right.
group.
It's
Um,
huge.
so yeah, the chances of being able to kind of get all those people together, or even half of them at short notice.
Right.
And everything. I mean, when you read Josephus, there's no sign of this Sanhedrin at all.
Right.
And you know why? What there's no reason why he would be, quiet about a Sanhedrin.
Right.
Instead, the picture you get from Josephus is that the chief priest just summons a few people to advise him. So chief priest, the high priest, is ultimately in charge.
Right.
And he might have a group of advisors to sort of help him out. What's the best thing to do about this man? What should we do?
Yeah. Yeah. So what about I mean, there's this fascinating little character in the Passions narratives, Barabbas, right?
Yeah.
What's going on there?
He's really curious, isn't he? Because
Yeah.
the name Barabbas means son of the father, which is sort of a little bit creepy. And then in Matthew, he's called Jesus Barabbas, so he's Jesus, son of the Father. And it's very
Interesting.
interesting that he's sort of dropped in this trial. He's there in all four Gospels, and
Yeah.
he's sort of compared with Jesus. Do you want Jesus the
Hmm.
Christ? Do you want Jesus Barabbas? So
Right.
yeah, I mean, I'm going to be talking about him a little bit in the in the lecture for the conference, and I don't want to give away too many
That's right,
secrets
right,
just now,
right.
but I do think he probably was a historical person, but he
Hmm.
somehow kind of got entangled in the story of Jesus. So
Fascinating.
yeah.
Wow. So one last piece of the story, the rich man's tomb.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, what give me a give us a little tease so that we come see your talk at the conference. Because the
Okay,
conference
so
is, just for everybody to know, the conference, the New Insights on the New Testament, September 26th, 28th. It's actually an online conference. So
mhm.
people don't have to go anywhere. They can actually listen to your whole thing online. But what about this rich man's tomb?
Yeah, so the gospel suggests it's a rich man's tomb, it's a new tomb, it's never been used before.
Uh-huh.
And you get this picture of sort of a grand mausoleum, something like that.
Uh-huh.
Joseph of Arimathea is quite a well-to-do member of the
Mm-hmm.
council and all of this. And then again, there are some people who say, rightly, that victims of crucifixion were normally not buried. I mean, it's part
Yeah.
of the horrendous nature of crucifixion that
Right.
you are up there, you're naked, you're exposed. It's deeply shameful. And part of the horrific nature is that, once you die, you're just eaten by the crows and the dogs, and your life is just snuffed out. The remembrance of you is gone.
Yeah.
You're not buried. Um, so so those are usually the two alternatives, but I think there is another alternative there, and
Uh-huh.
that's that there was another kind of burial, and that's what I'm going to be talking
Okay.
about. And you can completely understand why Christians wanted to give Jesus this nice burial.
Right, of course.
Everybody wants to think of their loved ones as having a good burial, um, but but there are some indications that Jews could be buried after
Uh-huh.
crucifixion, particularly at feasts. So
Okay, right.
I am going to go along the burial line, but in a different kind of way.
Fascinating. Okay, so you've also done some really beautiful work around female disciples of Jesus. And I mean, first off, I grew up in the sort of conservative evangelical world, super misogynistic, right? There are no women, right? I was at least in a mainline denomination that ordained women, but it was the Deep South. So when you went to one of my brand of mainline churches and a Southern Baptist church, you could tell no difference,
Wow.
except for the fact that we let women in. So tell me, which, and part of the narrative that's constructed is that there are only men in this disciple group. So tell me, like, how do you know there's female disciples?
Well, I wonder what Bible they've been reading.
Right? Exactly. Exactly.
Well, so I wrote a book on this with my good friend Joan Taylor,
Hmm.
who's an expert in all things to do with biblical women, and it was great fun because we went through all of these different women and kind of wrote, just wrote down what we know about them, putting them in their historical setting, their context, and actually, there's a lot of named women, but
Right.
the thing with the 12 is people always say, oh, Jesus just had 12 male
Right.
disciples.
Right.
So there is an important thing about the 12, and Jesus seems to have had 12 men to represent the
Hmm.
12 tribes of Israel, and there's
Right.
something going on there about restitution, reconstituting Israel,
Right.
putting things back to the way they were. But it's really clear from the Gospels too that there were plenty of women around too. So Mark, right at the end in the crucifixion scene, he says, there were women standing at a distance who had been with him from Galilee, and
Right.
he
Right.
named some of them, and Luke mentions them too. Matthew does as well. So suddenly, I mean, it's a little bit late in the day, but Mark is making it very clear that there are these women who have been on the road with Jesus, and he
Yeah.
names them, and Mary Magdalene is sort of the takes precedence in all of these
Hmm.
accounts. So suddenly your mental picture has to change. It's no longer
Yeah.
these sturdy lads, but Jesus in a mixed group. I mean, maybe
Right.
children. Who knows? It's a
Right.
group of men and women. And when you think about it, that actually would have been necessary because,
Yeah.
um, this is a very gendered society.
For sure.
So somebody like Peter couldn't have just gone into the house of, say, Martha and Mary and kind of
Right.
started baptizing them or
Hmm.
anointing them with oil. I mean, that would have been
Very
quite
intimate. Right.
scandalous. So you're going to need women to be able to go into the women's parts of the house, to talk to women, to meet women when they're washing clothes or out at
Hmm.
the market or whatever they're doing. So I think it's absolutely to be expected that there are women missionaries, women apostles, women spreading the news, just
Right.
as there are men. The unfortunate thing is that the gospel writers are really interested. Well, they're really interested in telling us about Jesus, but then when
Right.
it comes to Acts and the spread of the gospel, the author of Acts is sort of focusing the light on the men because he's interested in
Hmm.
spread first of all to Jerusalem and then the spread to Rome,
Right.
and it's these men that are doing it, and the women just kind of disappear
Fade
into the
off. Yeah.
background. It's also important, I think, to remember that the earliest Christians thought that the end of the world was coming very soon,
Like
that
right then.
God is
Right.
going to come and intervene and establish his kingdom. And in that kind of society where you think that, the world is not going to be around for very long, I think people are far less worried about things like social conventions and,
Right.
ordinary status. So I think even somebody like Paul was very happy to let women take his letter to the Romans. It's pretty clear that that's what Phoebe does.
Hmm.
He's
Hmm.
friends with people like Prisca, who's married to Aquila. So he speaks very highly of women who are
Yeah.
really in very prominent positions. Junior, the apostle.
Oh, right.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, once you start looking for it, you're finding women everywhere.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned, it's a really gendered society, a really gendered culture. And one of the things I've always been really fascinating about is the passage in Luke 8 where it talks about Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and Susanna sort of underwriting the work.
Mm.
Can you tell us more about that? How did that work?
Yeah, well, there's sort of two schools of thought on this. One
Okay.
is that that's what was happening. There may be
Hmm.
women of some kind of wealth. Joanna is certainly said to be married to Herod's steward, Chusa.
Uh-huh.
Maybe she's a woman of status and wealth. We don't know. Mary Magdalene, we know nothing more about her.
Right.
Maybe she was a wealthy widow too. And
Hmm.
it may be that these women were, you know, buying food for the travelers, giving money for poor relief. I mean, all the things that you would need. as you're on the journey, maybe people, people need replacement sandals, or
Right.
people need this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, so that's one school of thought. The other school of thought is that Luke does like to suggest that when there are women, they're
Hmm.
high status women.
Oh,
And I think
interesting.
there's a particular reason for this, in that in sort of society of that time, if you have a sort of a religious cult, you
Hmm.
don't want to say that too many women are associated with it, because to
Hmm.
say that it's attractive to women is a bad thing, particularly
Really?
lower class women. Yeah, if it's all right if they're posh women, women of
Right.
status, aristocratic women, that's okay. But if you say, there's a load of women, of working class women associated with this, that's a way to kind of to defame a group, to say
Oh,
that
really?
lots of women. And that's exactly what Celsus does in the 2nd century, where he's saying that Christianity is no good. He says, oh, there's loads of women and beggars and all of these
Right.
sorts of people. So it may be that what Luke is trying to do here, and this forms a pattern elsewhere, he does try to sort of up the status whenever he mentions women. They're
Right.
aristocratic women or rich women, or so that's also possible. I mean, of course, both could be true. It might be
Right.
that
For sure.
Luke is emphasizing that they're rich women, and actually they were rich women, and they
Hmm.
were bankrolling the operation.
Right.
But yeah, as with all these things, you have to be a little bit cautious.
Right. I'm curious because when in the popular idea amongst, people who are talking about the Bible, especially people who are not scholars, is that women couldn't own anything during that time. So, in order, obviously, for Luke's statement to be believable, there has to be some way for women to have control over resources. So, how did that work in the first century?
Yeah, I think one of the difficulties is that there's a difference between sort of legally what people could do and what they
Okay.
actually could do.
Right.
So,
Right.
legally, it may be the case that you can't, most of the time, women can't own things, because they're in the ownership of the male head of the family, who would then leave them to sons, or male relatives when they died. But it seems pretty clear that men did realize that their daughters or their wives could be left in financial hardship on their death.
Hmm.
And so you do have plenty of references, actually, to men gifting things to their daughters, or leaving something to their wives. And of course, if a man was rich, then a wealthy widow would actually have been in, a reasonably good position. She would have had a certain
Okay.
amount of independence. And we do have inscriptions from wealthy women who were able to sort of be a benefactor of
Okay.
groups. I mean, you're talking sort of high status women there,
Mm.
but even lower down the level, I think men did try to leave something to their women if they could.
Right.
Though of course that didn't always work, and
Hmm.
the Old Testament prophets talk about the plight of widows who are left with no son to look after them, and they're really in a very difficult position. But we shouldn't assume that no women had any kind of independent wealth. It might have been possible in some situations.
Yeah. So, I, what is it? Uh, what are some of the things when you talk about reclaiming these stories, right? What is your motivation? What are you hoping is an outcome of reclaiming these stories and identifying these women as part of the disciples of Jesus?
For me, it's more a question of historical accuracy,
Right?
really. I mean, it's not so much that I want to kind of, it's not so much a religious sort of, oh, I want to sort of,
Yeah, right.
think with Prisca, or anything like that. Though, I mean, I think these stories have a great deal of potential to be, used in church services, liturgy, that kind of thing. And a
Hmm.
lot of women do find it very helpful to think about women from the Jesus movement, women from the past. And, it's that whole role model thing. You need to be able to see women in the story. But for me, as much as anything, it's partly well, to a large extent, reclaiming
Yeah.
um, this almost hidden part of the story. It's not
Right.
just a story of Jesus and men and the male story of how the movement expanded, but I'm also very interested in what was happening in rural Galilee.
Okay.
How did people in these sort of small villages, how did they act out their Judaism? How did
Yeah.
they respond to the message? All these things that we don't really know very much about because the authors of the Gospels are not really telling us.
Right.
But I think we can kind of have a little look around and we can put some ideas together. So it's really about kind of raising the women, restoring them to their place,
Yeah.
and seeing a much more sort of variegated landscape.
Hmm. So, when you do your little look around in Galilee, what is the life of these women like? How do they practice their faith?
Well, yeah. So interesting. I mean, I do think that there's a long way between Galilee and Jerusalem. And
Right.
although the people in Galilee were incomers from the south, so they were
Hmm.
Judeans who'd moved up, so they had the same Jewish faith,
Right.
but I think in any sort of small setting, people develop their own ways of doing things. I'm
Right.
sure they had, their own practices, their own rituals, maybe for women,
Hmm.
around childbirth, around becoming pregnant in the first place,
Yeah.
perhaps, around death, those things
Hmm.
too, that may not have been exactly the same as in Jerusalem. Or they may. I mean, we don't know. But I
Right.
think it's very likely that they worked out their own ways. Magic too is an
Mm.
important thing in the first century. Magic tends to be sort of what we call it when we're being a bit negative to it,
Hmm.
but all these ideas that there are ways to manipulate the world of the spirits and
Hmm.
demons around here. And of course, Jews believed in spirits and demons just like anybody
Yeah.
else. Just open any pages of the Gospels and you can see that.
Right.
So yeah, I really like to try and sort of imagine what it might have been like in this sort of rural, small village society for women at the time.
Yeah. So, when the gospel writers are, having Jesus grow up where he does, in that world, um, when people hear that, right, they have there's a connotation to it, right? There's an association with, oh, the people from that area. What does that do? What color are they giving to Jesus by having him begin where he does?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting actually. The Gospels talk about Jesus from Nazareth, but
Right.
they call it a city.
Right.
So they say the polis, the city of Nazareth, and
Uh-huh.
sort of commentators in the past would just say, oh well, silly old gospel writers, they didn't know. I mean, we know now that Nazareth was this village of about 500 people, so it's
Hmm.
relatively small. But the gospel writers didn't know. I think they knew exactly what they were doing because in the
Hmm.
ancient world, to say you're from a village, a country
Hmm.
bumpkin, is again a way of demeaning somebody. And again, to go
Okay.
back to Celsus in the second century, this philosopher who had a lot to say about how bad Christians were. One of the things
Hmm.
he says is that the founder was a country bumpkin basically. So the gospel writers make out that he's from a city, and and as you go, I mean, by the second century, the proto-evangelium of James, a sort of
Hmm.
prequel to the Gospels, says that Mary was sort of from a well-to-do family, and they're sort of they're giving Jesus sort of a more um, sort of impressive background. But probably very few people knew anything about Nazareth in the first century. Josephus doesn't mention it at all, even when he's in the area. So I think that
Right.
just underlines how small it was.
Well, so uh, we Thank you for coming. And we are live right now, and I want to say again, you are speaking at this conference, New Insights on the New Testament, and people should definitely check that out. It's an online conference. You're going to be talking about what really happened in the last hours of Jesus's life, last days of Jesus's life. But if you are in our live audience and you'd like to ask a question of one of the leading scholars, I'd just like to invite you to put a question in the chat, whether you're on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube. And we've got just a little while left with Dr. Bond, and I'd love to see if you have any questions. And we'll see if we can answer them. But go ahead and put those in those chats. I can tell you that it always takes, there's like a lag, Dr. Bond, between when we say something and when people actually hear it. So while that lag is happening, I guess we're going to talk to the average person reading the Bible, what would be your sort of main thing that you'd like to say, like when you are reading the Bible, this?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, people read the Bible for so many different reasons, don't they? If you're reading it as a Christian, I think you read it very differently to
Right.
the way I might read it as a historian, trying
Right.
to get back behind these texts. I'm interested in how these texts are literary compositions, how they fit in with the sort of the literature of the day,
Right.
what they're trying to do. So yeah, I think there's just very different ways of reading a text. I always find it interesting to look at the differences and similarities too between the gospels. Most people think that Mark was the first gospel and Matthew and Luke copied off Mark, and then John probably copied off all of them. So if they all know each other, why are they telling the story differently?
Yeah.
What is it they're trying to do, and what does that say about what was important to them? Because clearly, what's important to us is truth, actual facts.
Right.
But they're clearly not bothered about facts. And actually, nobody in history was interested in facts until kind of, I don't know, the 18th century. I mean, people have a concept whether something happened or not, but the idea that truth is found in facts is a pretty sort of limiting one, really. I think truth is found in poetry and myth, in all these other.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've got a question from the name in TikTok is Socrates. So
Wow.
But Socrates is asking, why did Mark's gospel end so abruptly?
Yeah, well, people used to think that there was a bit missing, that he had carried on and the last page had sort of got disconnected. That's not a very popular opinion nowadays. There's no evidence for Mark carrying on beyond 16:8. Obviously those verses we have in modern Bibles were much later.
Right.
So nowadays people do think that he deliberately aimed to end at 16:8. I mean, everything has been said. Jesus he's died. He's risen again. The tomb is empty. This angelic figure has said to the women, he has been raised. He'll go before you to Galilee. So in a way, what more is to be said? That's kind of the story. And Mark's gospel is quite sort of, he likes mystery. He likes the element of secrecy, things not being quite so tied up as you'd like them. And so I think it fits in quite well with Mark's gospel to sort of end on this slightly odd note. The women ran away because they were scared.
Right.
Not, what's happening. In a way, it sort of invites the reader in, what are you going to make of this? Are you going to believe it, or are you just going to walk away? What's your response? And people sometimes say that's a very modern way of reading, but I don't think it is. A lot of
Hmm.
ancient ends in a sort of odd way. So
Hmm.
Mark isn't the only one.
Yeah. Okay, so on Instagram, Samuel Meyer is asking, how would the Jewish tradition of leaving the recently dead for 3 days before really believing a person was dead influence the death of Jesus?
Yeah, I mean, we know about this from rabbinic writings, and also, I mean, it's curious in John's Gospel that he has been dead 4 days. That's very specific. It suggests that there's already, in the first century, this idea that maybe the person isn't dead, but if they've been dead 4 days, then it's definite. And that may well have been part of the sort of the insistence that Jesus has been dead in the tomb for three
Mhm.
days. Um, and I think probably rumors were going around that Jesus hadn't died, because in Mark's gospel, the author seems very, very keen to really nail it down. When Joseph of Arimathea comes for the body and goes to Pilate, it seems kind of overdrive. Pilate asked the centurion, "Is he dead?" "Yes, he's dead. He's definitely dead." That it seems to be a bit overlabored.
Hmm.
But very clear that Jesus is dead. So perhaps stories have been going around that Jesus resuscitated in the tomb.
Right. Right. That makes sense. All right. So another user or viewer on Instagram says, Ponu Elizabeth says, who do you think was the beloved disciple that was with Jesus till the end? Traditions say it's John, but they've heard Dr. James H. Charlesworth suggest it might have been Thomas too. Was the beloved disciple just like a literary creation?
I think so. Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah. So people have speculated on who the beloved disciple was. John Zebedee is a popular one. Uh,
Hmm.
Charlesworth, yeah, says Thomas. Lazarus is also sometimes suggested because he's the only male that Jesus is ever said to have loved.
Hmm.
Um, but I don't think any of those. I mean, it's possible that sort of he's based on a real character, sort of from
Hmm.
decades earlier. But in the text as we have it, I think the beloved disciple is a sort of idealized disciple. He responds in the right way to everything. So he's leaning on
Hmm.
his breast at the Last Supper. He goes to the tomb. Peter walks in and Peter sees. The beloved
Right.
disciple goes in. He sees and believes. And
Hmm.
the beloved disciple is always that little bit better. And I think he kind of models the way that believers should be, always looking.
Uh-huh. Right. So, like you're saying that the beloved disciple is this uh is a is a narrative tool to sort of say this is how you should be as a follower of Jesus.
Exactly. And again, I think it's a sort of a development from Mark, and in biographies normally the hero is sort of the person you should follow, the person you should
Right.
aim to be like. And I think that's the case in Mark. Jesus keeps saying, follow me, and the idea is
Right.
be Jesus like, be Christ like. By the time you've got to John's gospel though, and Jesus is very clearly the word who was there in creation, the difference between sort of a believer and Jesus is pretty wide. And so I
Right.
think he sort of develops this character of the ideal or beloved disciple to be that kind of that role model for people. It's a character who always gets it. So people have to kind of try and be like the beloved disciple.
Yeah. Yeah. So, this has been a fantastic discussion. Morning for me here on the East Coast in the US, afternoon for you across the pond. Um, so, thank you for being with us and answering all of our questions. And we look forward to your lecture, your presentation at the New Insights on the New Testament later this month.
Thank you very much. It's been lovely talking to you, and hi to all your followers.
Right. We are going